a esta, la primera conferencia magistral del semestre, que estará a cargo de la doctora Carmen Haydée Rivera del Recinto de Río Piedras. Estamos muy contentos de contar con su presencia y de continuar con esta serie de conferencias magistrales que han formado parte de una iniciativa nueva que desarrolla nuestro programa graduado en Estudios Culturales y Humanísticos y que se titula Nuevos Horizontes. Esta iniciativa de crítica cultural contemporánea ha sido posible gracias al auspicio de la Mellon Foundation.
Muy buenos días. En primer lugar, les quiero agradecer a la audiencia por haber asistido en nombre del Departamento de Humanidades del Recinto Universitario de Mayagüez. También a nombre del Departamento de Humanidades quiero agradecer enormemente a la doctora Carmen Haydée Rivera por haber venido desde el recinto de Río Piedras, por toda la labor que realiza y por haber venido, ¿verdad?, a darnos unas palabras y para que podamos escuchar un poquito sobre las investigaciones que ella ha estado realizando y sobre el libro Diasporic Journeys, que en breve estaremos dialogando con ella sobre eso. También quiero agradecer al programa de la maestría en estudios culturales, quienes se han dado a la tarea, y al comité de graduado del Departamento de Humanidades, quienes se han dado a la tarea de organizar toda esta serie de actividades que, como mencionó la doctora Colón, comenzaron el semestre pasado. Y también a el programa financiado por la Mellon Foundation titulado Nuevos Horizontes en los Estudios Culturales y Humanísticos, en el cual, ¿verdad?, pues a partir del cual es que se pueden realizar esta serie de actividades que no solamente son charlas, sino que también hay otro tipo de eventos culturales que se están realizando y en el cual también pues podemos ofrecer una variedad de presentaciones a los estudiantes que son parte del programa de maestría, pero también a los estudiantes que participan de los bachilleratos del Recinto Universitario de Mayagüez para el enriquecimiento cultural. Aprovecho para hablarles del programa de maestría en estudios culturales que tenemos en el Departamento de Humanidades. Todas las personas aquí que estén realizando bachillerato, que quizás estén en los últimos semestres y estén considerando qué hacer en el futuro, el programa de maestría en estudios culturales ofrece una variedad de cursos que se centran principalmente en las humanidades, en los campos de la cultura, de las artes, de la literatura y también en áreas de las ciencias sociales. Por lo tanto, es un programa multidisciplinario en el cual tenemos estudiantes que vienen desde el derecho, desde las artes, desde la literatura, desde la filosofía, desde el cine, así que, ¿verdad?, está abierto a una variedad de estudiantes que tengan interés especialmente en estudios teóricos multidisciplinarios. Sin más, les dejo con la doctora Colón para que haga la presentación. Muchas gracias.
Procedo entonces a presentar a nuestra invitada de hoy. La doctora Carmen Haydée Rivera es profesora del Departamento de Inglés de la Facultad de Humanidades del Recinto de Río Piedras. Completó su doctorado en literatura americana con un énfasis en las literaturas multiétnicas de los Estados Unidos en Northeastern University en Boston, Massachusetts. Su trabajo de investigación aborda la producción literaria de la diáspora puertorriqueña en los Estados Unidos, la literatura contemporánea de la comunidad latina en los Estados Unidos, la literatura de la migración caribeña y los estudios de la mujer. A lo largo de su trayectoria académica, la doctora Rivera se ha desempeñado como directora del Departamento de Inglés y coordinadora de su programa graduado. Ha fungido también como decana de asuntos académicos en la oficina del decano de estudios graduados e investigación del Recinto de Río Piedras, así como decana de asuntos académicos y rectora interina. Ha coeditado las colecciones de ensayos Writing Off the Hyphen, New Perspectives on the Literature of the Puerto Rican Diaspora y Cuba and Puerto Rico, Transdisciplinary Approaches to History, Literature and Culture. Es la autora, además, de una bibliografía crítica, o debo decir biografía crítica, de la reconocida escritora chicana Sandra Cisneros y de una serie de entrevistas con escritores de la diáspora puertorriqueña titulada Diasporic Journeys, Interviews with Puerto Rican Writers in the United States. Sus artículos han sido publicados en numerosas revistas, tales como The Ethnic Studies Review, el Central Journal, New West Indian Guide, Latino Research Review, Caribbean Studies, Camino Real, estudio de las hispanidades norteamericanas, OPSID, revista del Centro de Investigaciones Históricas, la revista Umbral, El Sol, revista de la Asociación de Maestros de Puerto Rico, y Sargazo, Journal of Caribbean Literature, Language and Culture, entre otros. Demos una cordial bienvenida a la profesora Carmen Haydée Rivera.
Muchísimas gracias. Muy buenos días a todos, todas, todes. Qué alegría ver una audiencia de tantas personas queridas acompañándome en esta mañana. Sé que esta es su hora universal y pueden estar en muchos otros sitios, right? Pero les agradezco infinitamente la presencia hoy. A la doctora Emilia Quiñones Otal, muchas gracias por esa amable presentación y por estar aquí. Sabemos lo ocupadas que son las posiciones administrativas, así que gracias. Al comité organizador, al doctor Jeffrey Hurley Jimera, que no pudo estar con nosotros hoy, pero está en algún lugar del universo conectado. Muchas gracias por la invitación, al doctor Christopher Powers y a la doctora Marian Colón Pizarro. Gracias por esa amable presentación igualmente. Agradezco la presencia entre la audiencia de colegas muy queridos, a doctora Beatriz Jenin Figueroa, que nos acompaña aquí, el doctor Irizarry, del Departamento de Inglés. Veo a mi querida colega jubilosa del Departamento de Estudios Hispánicos, la doctora Liani Julia. Gracias por estar por acá con nosotros desde tu jubilación de nuevo en el recinto. La doctora Julia Cristina Ortiz, debo decir, ¿verdad? Yo la conozco en otro plano. Y estudiantes subgraduados y graduados de muchos departamentos, colegas, guests también, y mi querido esposo, Axel López, que también nos acompaña en esta mañana. So thank you very much for being here. Yo voy un poco a hablar, yo vengo de un departamento de inglés, como dijo la compañera, en el recinto de Río Piedras, así que esto un poco va a ser una presentación bilingüe, ¿no? Utilizo ambos idiomas. But I wanted to begin by saying that I'm very honored to be here with you to talk about diasporic Puerto Rican writers and to celebrate the presentation of my latest book called Diasporic Journeys, Interviews with Puerto Rican Writers in the U.S. Puerto Rican writers have entered a new century of artistic production and critical analyses that highlight the many ways in which authors that were either born in Puerto Rico or born in the United States from Puerto Rican parents have reconceptualized and re-envisioned the American literary landscape, and also the notion of what we consider Puerto Rican literature. They incorporate a myriad thematic concerns in their works, right? Issues such as cultural identity, history, migration, and return migration to Puerto Rico, language, race, and gender, among many others, from transnational and intersectional perspectives. They also incorporate new forms of assessing these issues from different autobiographic and creative views. Not only have diasporic Puerto Rican authors reached new heights in the publishing industry, as well as national and international acclaim and recognition, but they have also delved into different artistic venues and modalities that no longer necessarily apply to the written page. This artistic production is at the heart of their success and continued transformation of the printed word and the spoken word that enhances the legacy of artistic and literary development and production in the United States and also in Puerto Rico. Aside from their repertoire of artistic and literary works, their active presence on different social media platforms and the way that they have entered the publication industry and social media in general have positioned us with readily available information on them. But I am also interested in the ways in which these writers write their stories, right? What motivates them to write their stories? How do they come to the printed page, to a publication press, or to a theatric scenario, for example? How do they arrive at a community center with their works, or a university to present their projects, or even public spaces? How do they find themselves before a camera lens, an open mic, or a radio show? What about their history and their family backgrounds? Where does this energy and creativity come from? And what happens when it is released into the universe? As I thought about these questions and the importance of a project that would address them, I relied primarily on my academic training for the past 25 years, right? I've been a professor for the past 25 years, and I've also researched and written about these authors and diasporic Puerto Rican literature in general. Yet every time I happen to walk down the streets of New York City, for example, where so many migrants or immigrants have walked before me, including my own family, right? My parents, my father, my mother. I kept thinking, this project really goes beyond my academic training. It didn't start at the university level, right? It actually dawned on me that the work that I've been doing all this time really began many years even before I was born. Y aquí entonces haré un paréntesis para hablarles en español, que es el idioma que me enseñaron mis padres, ¿verdad? Al nacer. Porque mi viaje o mi journey, como diríamos, es el producto de la decisión de mis padres de emigrar de Puerto Rico a Estados Unidos. Primero a la ciudad de Nueva York y luego a la ciudad de Boston. Desde allí forjaron una vida que incluía no solo nuestro idioma, sino también nuestras tradiciones y costumbres, nuestras comidas, la música, todos los holgorios familiares habidos y por haber que todos conocemos, ¿verdad? En otras palabras, nos criaron a mis hermanos y a mí bien puertorriqueños y los reforzaban con viajes continuos a la isla en nuestras vacaciones de verano para que conociéramos a nuestra familia extendida. Ese legado que cuidaron con tanto esmero, el mismo que han desarrollado tantos y tantas emigrantes, puertorriqueños y puertorriqueñas, por más de un siglo de historia, es el responsable de que hoy día me encuentre hablando con ustedes en este maravilloso recinto. A su vez, esa historia documenta que actualmente hay más boricuas radicados en Estados Unidos que en la misma isla, según los datos estadísticos del último censo del 2020. Luego de 2 décadas, mis padres deciden regresar a Puerto Rico, a las bellas montañas de su pueblo natal de Orocovis. ¿Hay algún orocobeño por aquí? ¿Del centro de la isla? ¿O todos son de Mayagüez? Bueno. Y con esa decisión de vuelta, me trajeron a mí, para que siguieran fortaleciendo los lazos que nos unen. De modo que el ser que ustedes ven hoy aquí, bilingüe, bicultural y en constante vaivén transnacional entre Puerto Rico y los Estados Unidos, es en gran medida producto de esa crianza y ese apoyo de mis padres. Yo les agradezco infinitamente a mis padres las decisiones que tomaron, nunca se las he cuestionado. No tan solo de emigrar a Estados Unidos, sino también, y más importante aún para mí y para mi desarrollo, el que hayan vuelto a la isla, el que hayan regresado a la isla que los vio nacer. Agradezco su compromiso con nuestra cultura y con nuestra patria, a la vez que nos animaron a estrechar nuestras alas y hacer nuestros nidos en los países que quisiéramos. Hoy día, yo soy la única de sus retoños que vive en Puerto Rico. Pero mis hermanos y hermanas siguen muy ligados a nuestra isla y nuestras costumbres. Comprendo ahora que hace muchos años atrás, mis padres sembraron las semillas en mi crianza y que luego germinarían en mi apreciación por la literatura diaspórica puertorriqueña y una vida dedicada a su enseñanza. Es por eso, al trabajar en este libro de entrevistas, encontré tantas similitudes con historias que eran muy parecidas a las mías, lo que me ayudó a entender y apreciar más el éxodo y la travesía de estos escritores y escritoras. And now, back to academia. Every project also has its journey, and mine brought me precisely to the University of Puerto Rico in the 1990s as a graduate student, as many of you perhaps are today, under the mentorship of Dr. Lowell Feet and Dr. Maria Cristina Rodriguez. I apologize for the voice today. It's not too pristine. Lowell was the first professor to assign a diasporic Puerto Rican author in his seminar on contemporary American writers. And for the first time in my academic development at the master's degree, I was exposed to the work of Miguel Piñeros and his play Short Eyes. This single act opened a world of possibilities and academic interest for me in the exploration of other Puerto Rican and Latinx authors that I hadn't been exposed to within the realms of an English department majoring in literature. You can imagine the many inquiries I had upon realizing how a long list of authors that had been absent actually from my university studies was available. Puerto Rican authors like me who wrote in English, in Spanish, in Spanglish, right? Authors that I could actually relate to on the written page. So I am very grateful to Lowell for being my first mentor on this journey of discovery. Though he has since retired from academia, we still communicate and meet often, together with his wife, Maria Cristina Rodriguez, whose work on Caribbean women writers has also been very inspirational in my own development. She has been one of the main supporters of my work and the creation of several courses at the undergraduate and graduate level. One of the most recent being a doctoral seminar on Hispanophone Caribbean literature in diaspora, which focuses on writers from Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic writing in English in the United States, which I taught for the first time actually last semester. Both Lowell and Maria Cristina are founding members of the doctoral program in Caribbean Studies at our institution. My interest in Latinx literature continued at the doctoral level and was nurtured by a very avant-garde educator, Dr. Bonnie Tu Smith at Northeastern University. Bonnie allowed me the rare privilege of focusing on what was then called multi-ethnic literatures of the United States, which involved close readings and literary analyses of works by Latinx, African American, Native American, and Asian American writers. Bonnie expanded my knowledge of the array of literary voices enriched by many cultures and many languages and perspectives who honored their histories and asserted their presence in the world of American letters. And so my horizons were broadened by the fact that not only were Puerto Rican writers writing in English in the United States, but also authors from these other cultural groups with many times with many things in common as well. Under Bonnie's mentorship, I discovered one of the first works written by a Puerto Rican author in English, published in the United States in 1931, as far back as 1931, which was Pedro Juan Labar's novel, The Son of Two Nations. I went on to study the foundational works of Jesus Colón, Bernardo Vega, Piri Thomas, Edwin Torres, Ed Vega Junque, Abraham Rodriguez, and Ernesto Quiñones, among many others. And to my delight, I also discovered the women writers that became my main object of study and the subject of my doctoral dissertation. I delved into the early works of Luisa Capetillo and Julia de Burgos, quienes también formaron parte de la diáspora en un momento dado de sus vidas, y sabemos que Julia de Burgos muere, ¿verdad?, trágicamente en Nueva York. I studied the works of Nicolás Amor, Judith Ortiz Coffer, Aurora Levis Morales, Esmeralda Santiago, Irene Vidar, among others. I also excuse me, so sorry. I was also inspired by the New York Rican poets and the foundation of the New York Rican Poets Cafe in 1973. I learned about the cafe's founding fathers and first directors, Miguel Algarín and Miguel Piñero. I read the works of Sandra María Esteves, Pedro Pietri, Tato Laviera, Jack Agueros, Victor Hernandez Cruz, Martin Espada, and so many others. And also contemporary writers like Willy Perdomo, Shaggy Flores, Bonafide Rojas, and the incomparable María Mariposa Fernandez. This was a very eye-opening experience for me. And I have also been very fortunate to meet the executive director of the cafe today, Caridad La Bruja de la Luz, which many of you may know, and hosted a presentation of her work at Río Piedras last semester. Now there are so many other writers, so many contemporary new writers on the scene that we can also discover. So you see why this project comes at a pivotal time in our study of literary history. Most importantly, I bring the examples of these inspirational mentors that I had for the many students out in the audience who now have the privilege of studying different fields, including diasporic Puerto Rican writers, with perhaps much more access and much more ease than I had. During the time that I was searching for these authors and discovering them, social media wasn't such a big thing, right, as it is now. So you have a lot of information readily available at your fingertips just by doing searches, conducting searches on these writers. I also believe that it takes committed educators to bring forth these paths of knowledge, to let their students create their own journeys of discovery, especially when they can see relatable images reflected on the printed page. This approach is known today as culturally relevant pedagogy and studied by many theorists and educators such as Gloria Ladson-Billings, who highlights the importance of developing students academically, but also a willingness to nurture and support cultural competence and also a socio-political and critical consciousness. Under this method, the study of literature may also turn into a life's vocation of reading, research, and teaching, like my own, influenced by the strong and courageous mentors who preceded me. I really believe that something marvelous happens when you find yourself on a written page. You seem to feel empowered and valued and also seen. And although reading it isn't only about finding what is familiar to you, culturally relevancy adds to our understanding and appreciation of the written word and to the power of a literary work to move and to delight us. So I encourage both my colleagues and students in the audience to create these spaces of mutual commitment, especially to the study of diasporic Puerto Rican writers, and to encourage the creativity and writing abilities of students who also have wonderful and important stories to tell. Are there any poets in this classroom, in this audience? Poets, writers, creative writers? Yay, I see one back there. Over here, wonderful. And so that creativity really comes to the forefront when you see a work that is also depicting things that you are familiar with, right? Sometimes when you read a work in English and all of a sudden you find a Spanish word in the middle of a paragraph, right? Or whole sequences of Spanish. When a writer is talking about the island, right? You see yourself reflected in those experiences, which adds to your own creativity as well. In terms of other influences for this project, I relied a lot on the work of Carmen Dolores Hernandez, which many of you may know. She's a journalist for El Nuevo Día newspaper and has published extensively, especially interviews on different diasporic Puerto Rican authors. And she has two important works, Puerto Rican Voices in English, Interviews with Writers, which she published back in 1997, and A Viva Voz, Entrevistas a Escritores Puertorriqueños, which she published in 2007. So I was first exposed to her interviews when I was a doctoral student working on Diasporic Puerto Rican Writers, so I used the English version, Puerto Rican Voices in English, to contextualize and help me kind of come to terms with the writers that I was writing about in my dissertation. And I found them very revealing, because one thing is for you to read an author. Another thing is for you to read the words of that author, right? The way that they come to the written page, their history, their stories, what influences them, what they read, how writing comes to them. Is it difficult? Do they have writer's block, etc.? Right? And these interviews that Carmen Dolores worked on helped me see that part of that aspect of the writing also. Yet more than 2 decades have passed since the publication of Carmen Dolores' first work, and a whole bunch of other writers have appeared, right? So my work, in a way, follows in the grain of Carmen Dolores and adds 13 additional authors and their stories in a collected work. Some of the writers are no longer situated in New York City, right? When we think of diasporic Puerto Rican writers, we almost always think of New York, but it's not necessarily the locus any longer for them. Some of them are there, others aren't. And they range in geographic proportions throughout the United States. For example, some of them are in Pennsylvania, in Florida, others are in Illinois, in Michigan. One is in California, and one is in particular is in Hawaii, Honolulu. And so it is a broad span of writers that covers the geographic space of the United States, and also one who has since relocated back to Puerto Rico, which was also very important for me to include, because diaspora, the other part of diaspora is return migration. Right? Or the constant, what Jorge Duani calls the constant nación en vaivén, right? Coming and going from these two spaces. So to be able to include Raquel Salas Rivera's work in this collection is also very important. In conceptualizing this project, I was interested in pivotal aspects of the writers' lives. And I worked on a questionnaire, an original questionnaire for them to follow. And most of them, for the most part, they did follow the questionnaire. But as happens cuando hablamos con un boricua, they never stick to the script, right? So there was a lot of information that I got from these writers that was outside of the questions that I originally had in mind, particularly because I don't know everything about their lives, right? So interesting things started coming up in the conversations that we had. So some of the questions that I wanted to talk about with them, I have a list of some of them that we have here. I was interested in where they were born, particularly interested in the fact of whether they experienced the process of migration, right? Whether they were born here or whether they were born in the United States, their siblings, their parents, if they could share any memories of their childhood, where they were educated, if they had any formal training in writing, because some of them don't actually. Some of them writing comes more spontaneously to them. Others were more formally educated. I was also interested if they grew up in a bilingual household, if they spoke Spanish and English at home, or only Spanish at home and English outside the home. What was their experience as children, also in schools, in their neighborhoods, what they were doing right now, their current job. Most of all, I was interested in their identity, how they identify, and if cultural identity was something important to them, right? What these labels that we use almost always, right? What do they mean to them? And how they identified at this moment. Other things that I was interested in was their ties to the island, right? How frequently do they come back or visit? Have they lived on the island if they were born in the United States? Have they noticed any changes? Do they follow current issues on the island that they cared to comment on? And almost all of them commented on This book has many years in the making, right? So they commented back on Hurricane Maria, the ousting of a governor in 2019, and et cetera, right? So they had a lot to say about their connections to the island. And the process of writing was very important to me. How they came to the process of writing, when they first started, the topics that interested them, the authors that they read, right? Who were their favorite authors? Experience with writer's block, right? Have they ever had experience with writer's block? Or does writing come very naturally and, fluidly to them? And also their connections to other writers and organizations, and whether they have participated in writing workshops. Their publications, on the process of publication, we spoke about that. Is it easy? Is it not, right? How they use social media. Do they have Facebook, Instagrams, blogs, whatever, right? Is there a presence of these writers? Many of them do, right? Many of them more than others. And they commented a lot on how this has changed their writing in terms of accessibility, right? And you can see that in the interviews. And other topics of concern that I also approached was the meaning of writing to them, the main concerns that they had, the advice that they would give other writers, right? They are already in the fold, right? They're already published and accomplished, some of them internationally renowned. What advice would they give a person just starting to write? And also how they would like to be remembered, right? Not that I'm killing any of them off, right? But what is the legacy that they want to leave behind? This is a question that people, usually ask when a person is in older age, right? But it has nothing to do with age, really. It has to do with how you want to be seen and how you want to be remembered, how you want your work to impact another person that is reading it. And now I would like to talk about some of the writers that I included in the work. For example, beginning with the incomparable Janina Braschi. She is a writer who has a very eclectic literary voice, right? And she brings important messages, confronts stereotypes, and also, prejudices of all kinds, right? Race, class, gender, among many other topics in her works. Jojo Boing and the United States of Banana. Janina, she relies heavily on a very eclectic background, history, philosophy, comparative lit, and other fields of study to develop a very spiraling kind of bilingual narrative and poetic expression, quite unique in diasporic Puerto Rican writers. Her work is a hybrid of poetry, fiction, theater, and Latinx philosophy. It's quite a challenge to follow her writing. She writes books in Spanish, in Spanglish, and in English on far-ranging topics from history, American immigration, economy, philosophy, colonialism, love, liberty, creativity. She was born in Puerto Rico, in San Juan. She was a fashion model, a singer, and a tennis champion before she entered academia, so she has a very interesting background. She studied in Spain, in Italy, in England, and France before settling in New York City. With a PhD in Hispanic literatures from the State University of New York, Stony Brook, she has taught at Rutgers University, the City University of New York, and also in writing workshops in France and Sweden. She has published on Cervantes, Garcilaso, Machado, Lorca, and Beckett. Her works have been translated into several languages. She's a Renaissance woman in her own right, and I think she's one of the most important contemporary writers of our time. She has a lot to say on the writing process. Another interesting figure that I included is Rodney Morales. Rodney Morales is a second-generation Hawaiian-born novelist, short story writer, editor, and retired professor of creative writing from the University of Honolulu, whose Puerto Rican ancestors migrated to Hawaii in the early part of the 20th century. His work includes an amalgamation of Native American, Asian, and Spanish dialects in his portrayal of Puerto Rican settlement on the island in his short story collection, The Speed of Darkness, and in his novel For a Song. He is known for blending real-life, local figures into fictionalized characters in mystery crime stories with insights into the complex layers of Hawaiian society which few know and fewer even dare to speak about. Rodney has given public talks about how he uses local Hawaiian historical, archival, and news journalistic research to breathe life into his character. He's only been to Puerto Rico once. We invited him to give a talk at the University of Puerto Rico in Río Piedras. He barely speaks Spanish, but his ties to the island are very strong, right? His grandparents migrated to Hawaii. His parents were born first generation Hawaiian, and he is second generation Hawaiian. And he has a lot to say about Puerto Rico. He follows contemporary trends and what's happening in Puerto Rico. And he assures us in the interview that Puerto Rico will be the main subject of his next novel. Luisita López Torregrosa, also an interesting figure. She has two autobiographical works, The Noise of Infinite Longing and Before the Rain. Her story is fascinating. Right? She was born in Puerto Rico, but for many years she worked as a journalist on different assignments throughout the world. She worked for the New York Times, National Geographic, and the Condé Nast Traveler, among some of the magazines, just to mention a few. She has reported from the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Japan, Brazil, Cuba, and Puerto Rico. She's lived in Manila, in Tokyo, and in different parts of the United States. She has also taught at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, at Fordham University, and at the University of Miami. Coming from a long line of family members in the field of journalism and communication, and some famous island political figures, Luisita's writing is very crafted and full of sensorial images that reveal her careful use of language, traversing such important themes as migration, belonging, family, sexuality, and confronting patriarchal norms. Her work breaks boundaries on many levels and is not for the weak of heart. She presents critical commentary on the very meaning of life, love, and human relationships in ways that few authors have done before or since her. Larry LaFontaine Stokes, is also in this collection of interviews, and many of you know him as a literary critic more than as a creative writer. But he is an author, a critic, a professor, and performer who currently teaches at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Larry delivers a wonderful interview on the development of his bilingual short story collection, Uñas Pintadas de Azul, Blue Fingernails. With degrees from Harvard and Columbia University, he has taught courses on Latino studies, American studies, Spanish, queer, Hispanic, Caribbean literature, LGBTQ+ studies, and Latino literature, theater, performance, and film. Most of the stories that Larry writes focus on gay Puerto Rican characters and sometimes incorporate elements of science fiction and fantasy. Out of the writers featured in this collection, he is one of the most active on social media and has participated in several YouTube videos with his drag queen persona, Lola Von Miramar. He has received several awards for his creative writing and scholarships, as well for his work on Latino and lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender students. Larry's interview is actually one of the longest in the work. He had so much to say, but not surprisingly, right? But also his sincerity, his authenticity, and his kindness really came through. I was very, very honored to sit with him for such a long time. And also, some of the process of these interviews happened in person, others happened online, right, through Google Meets or Zoom. Some of the writers also wrote answers to the questionnaires and emailed them to me. We were writing during the pandemic, so it was, it was difficult to meet. And he was very generous with his time. And those of you who know Larry know what I'm talking about, right? The next writer I wanted to mention briefly is Aya de Leon. Aya de Leon is a spoken word poet, novelist, and social activist working out of the Bay Area in California. She also teaches courses at University of California, Berkeley. She has a detective mystery series that includes several novels, like Chick Nation among them, which is set in post-Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico. Aya is of Puerto Rican, African American, and West Indian heritage, and much of her work explores issues of race, gender, socioeconomic class, body, nation, and the climate crisis. She has toured extensively as an independent artist and developed a hip-hop theater show called Thieves in the Temple, The Reclaiming of Hip Hop, focusing on fighting sexism and consumerism in the hip hop nation. Last year, she was named the second Poet Laureate of Berkeley, and she intends to use the position to highlight racism, social justice, and to uplift youth voices. She is also the author of a children's book that you see here, Puffy, the People Whose Hair Defies Gravity. And it's a celebration of the authentic, untamed self as expressed through our hair textures. And sometimes when we look at these authors, we see them in different phases of their lives, or in different levels of development in their work. And some of them delve into young adult children and young adult literature, right, YA literature. Partly because many of these issues on race and class and gender come up in their own families and as part of their own lives, right? And so this work was very important for her to also follow. Caridad de la Luz, as I have mentioned, is now the executive director of the New York Rican Poets Cafe. She has also had, has wonderfully evocative and feminist depictions of the meaning of life, empowerment, and the pursuit of happiness in her work. She's a spoken word poet, an actress, a songwriter, a singer, a community activist. She explores her New Yorker identity and social justice issues in ways that traverse different scenarios from the printed page in numerous anthologies, performances, television, film, recording studios, social media, theater, and even the American Museum of Natural History, just to name a few. Works such as The Poetician serve to position Caridad in the front row of avant-garde poetic images and innovative spoken word expression, both on and off the page. She is perhaps one of the most who exploit social media, right? She's a presence in social media. She's the recipient of numerous awards and has, as I mentioned, since taken on the directorship of the New York Rican Poets Cafe. She's contributing important changes to its platform as a decades-old institution in the city of New York. Pulitzer Prize winning dramatist Lin-Manuel Miranda, who needs little introduction, I think, is perhaps one of the most recognized figures in the group of writers that I have in this collection. His plays, as well as his interview, demonstrates his unwavering commitment to Puerto Rico and provides insight into his bilingual, bicultural upbringing, which he values and elevates on many levels. A Pulitzer Prize, Grammy, Emmy, Tony Award-winning composer, lyricist, writer, and actor, Lin-Manuel personifies the constant flow of a life in movement between Puerto Rico and the US. His career spans from theater to film to television, recording studios, and the music industry. He is also known for his social activism, his philanthropy, and support of cultural venues and the arts, both in the United States and in Puerto Rico. He often explores themes of migration, cultural identity, gentrification, race, exclusion, and historicity within transnational lenses. And although we know a lot about him because he seems to be everywhere, right? There are subtle details of family histories and experiences on the island, his views on the process of writing that are very revealing in the collection, in the interview that I have in this collection. These are some of the other writers that I include, right? There are 13, I'm not gonna talk about all of them, right? But in particular, I wanted to mention Roque Raquel Salas Rivera's work and Maria Mariposa Fernandez, for example. Their poetry has really elevated the voices of diasporic Puerto Rican writers, and Roque Raquel has actually come back to Puerto Rico. So they travel frequently, right? Throughout, and their interviews are quite revealing as well. Javier Avila was a professor actually at the University of Puerto Rico, Río Piedras, who has since left many years ago and has also become a writer. He has a very interesting work titled The Trouble with My Name, and it talks about how people mispronounce Javier Avila over and over again in the United States, right? How do you pronounce Javier Avila in English? And he has all this variety of ways in which people address him, right? Javier, Avila, and all the possible mispronunciations of his name. And he's actually turned this work into a stand-up comedy that he travels with throughout the United States. He's been to Puerto Rico with it as well. And others. Migdalia Cruz is a wonderful playwright. Even before Lin-Manuel existed, Migdalia Cruz existed, right? She has over 60 plays to her name, has traveled extensively throughout the United States. Kiara Alegría Hoods is actually a collaborator with Lin-Manuel Miranda. She's the one who wrote the script for In the Heights, together with Lin-Manuel, and she is also a Pulitzer Prize-winning author in her own right. So she also has very interesting things to say. Maria Mariposa Fernandez coined the term diasporican, right, an ode to the diasporican in her poetry. And finally, José Luis Torres Padilla also has a short story collection called Migrations, which talks about the constant flow of Puerto Ricans from the island to the United States. This is the table of contents of the book. More or less, I start with an introduction that gives like an overview of the historical development of diasporic Puerto Rican writers in the United States, some history, some cultural knowledge of how the literature develops, to then introduce the different writers, the 13 writers. And at the end of the work, I also add additional information on the authors, which includes the titles of their works, their social media presence, if they have Facebook pages, if they're on Instagram, if they're on Facebook, if they're on X, or formerly known as Twitter. It was Twitter at the time I published the book, now it's X, so that you can also have additional information on them. I include a bibliography of the works that, also the critical works mainly, that inform the work, and then some very brief biographical information on me. Okay, I wanted to kind of conclude by saying that this book is by no means exhaustive. These aren't the only Puerto Rican diasporic Puerto Ricans out there. There are many more. It's only a small sample of the many voices that continue to enhance a literary tradition that is often still underplayed and understudied in hegemonic studies of American literature in the US, and also Puerto Rican literature on the island. Many of these authors' works have since been translated into Spanish and into many other different languages. I believe they are an important component in the overview and study of Puerto Rican literature as a whole. With the prominence and recognition that many of these writers have received, it is no longer possible to underestimate or ignore the significance of their works. On the contrary, their writing is more pertinent than ever. The authors in this collection, as well as many others like them, are an important and essential part of our journey toward a richer and more inclusive understanding of an evolving literary landscape that showcases the Puerto Rican experience. Their work requires continued examination and critical study. My hope, actually, is that some of you in this audience are inspired to continue the journey of interviewing and publishing the words of current and future writers to keep the circle going. You will discover, as I have done through many years of reading, teaching, research, and writing, and certainly through the process of publishing this work, what an enriching experience it really is. So I thank you very much for joining me on this enticing journey of discovery, recognition, and praise of our diasporic Puerto Rican writers. Me entusiasma mucho seguir la conversación con ustedes. Les agradezco su paciente escucha en la audiencia de hoy. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias por su presentación y ahora cedemos el micrófono a la audiencia. Colegas, estudiantes que tengan alguna pregunta o comentario, comenzamos por aquí con Sebastián.
Como dijo la doctora Colón, yo soy Sebastián, soy estudiante de la maestría, también estudio cultural y humanístico. Felicidades por su libro y excelente presentación. Quería preguntarle, ¿cómo la clase social de las personas que usted entrevistó afecta o vio que afectaba en su proceso creativo o en su conexión a comunidades de escritores, escritoras o acceso a editoriales? Es una pregunta bastante abierta, pero quería ver si ha visto algún patrón. Si me voy a responder, muchísimas gracias.
Sí, bueno, en cuanto a temática, abarcan bastante, hay similitudes en la temática de la entrevista, ¿verdad? No solamente porque hubo unas preguntas guías, ¿verdad?, donde todos hablaban un poco del mismo tema, pero también en la experiencia diaspórica de estos escritores. O sea, muchos de ellos que nacieron en Puerto Rico tuvieron la experiencia de emigrar y tenían, como muchos desde ese momento y aún en este tiempo, esos enfrentamientos con lo que es dejar la isla atrás para encontrarse en un entorno que es vastamente diferente a lo que dejan. Right? So there was similarities in what they talked about. En cuanto a la producción y publicación, variaba mucho, variaba. Algunos se fueron a través de imprentas universitarias, right, university presses, otros fueron más freelance, otros empezaron con sus propias publicaciones y luego una casa editorial estuvo interesado en su obra. Algunos están publicados por prestigiosas editoriales en Estados Unidos, algunos tienen mucho más alcance. Lin-Manuel, por ejemplo, la obra de él tiene mucho más alcance que algunos de los otros escritores. Así que en cuanto a la vida y el acercamiento de publicación, variaba mucho. En cuanto a su experiencia, era bastante parecida.
Me interesa el proceso de la entrevistadora y porque me interesa la entrevista como su propio género literario también. Pero que responde a una práctica oral, ¿verdad? Que es distinta de cuando te sientas a escribir primero, ¿no? Porque es algo que se transcribe y se toman decisiones sobre cómo transcribir, qué transcribir, cuánto incluyo de los silencios, por ejemplo, o no incluyo los silencios, cuánto incluyo de quizá particularidades orales de quien responde y también de quien entrevista, cuánto quiero que la entrevista parezca como si fue escrita originalmente o quiero retener elementos de la oralidad de esa práctica. Bueno, en fin, que si nos puedes contar un poco de decisiones tomadas a propósito de la práctica de la entrevista y luego su conversión a un texto escrito que está publicado en un libro, como también un gesto creativo de parte de la entrevistadora y unas decisiones que se toman también que son de carácter literario, me parecen a mí, de cómo convertir esa oralidad en algo escrito. Gracias.
Gracias por tu pregunta, Beatriz. Para mí fue una experiencia fascinante. Es la primera vez que embarco en esta experiencia de la entrevista. Mis escritos anteriores han sido muy académicos, ¿verdad? Desde el punto de ensayo crítico académico sobre la obra de los autores y las autoras, pero esta vez fue un banquete, fue una experiencia tan buena, porque tenía la referencia de Carmen Dolores, ¿verdad? De cómo ella entrevistó a los escritores antes. Pero no me preparó para la fascinación que tuve con estos escritores y estas escritoras. Y lo pueden imaginar, porque es que cuando uno habla con un boricua es que la cosa se sale por los poros, ¿no? Y me dieron mucha información, y como tú bien dices, tuve que editar, ¿verdad? Tuve que hacer unas decisiones editoriales de cuánto iba a incluir, cuánto iba a dejar fuera. Algo que me ayudó en el proceso es que estuve en constante comunicación con las escritoras y con los escritores, y ellos vieron la versión final antes de que fuera a imprenta. O sea que ellos también tuvieron la oportunidad de un poco editar. Y quería que fuera así porque no quería, primero, misrepresent anything that they said, right? Quería tener lo más fiel posible a cómo se discutió. Algunas entrevistas son un poco más largas que otras, simplemente porque dieron más información. Una de ellas, por ejemplo, Migdalia, fue muy escueta en su respuesta. Y aunque yo trataba de que me dijera un poquito más de esto, ella decidió lo que iba a aportar era eso. Otros, tenía que decir, ok, less, porque era demasiado. Entonces, si lo hacía por FaceTime, ¿verdad? Tenía que luego transcribir todo eso. Y yo lo transcribía completo, como lo dijeron. Y luego entonces empezaba a, trim down. Tuve la maravillosa oportunidad de trabajar con estudiantes graduados también, que fueron mis asistentes. Y ellas también me ayudaron un poco en la transcripción. La oralidad la intenté mantenerla lo más posible. Intenté mantener esa forma de hablar de cada cual. I had to edit out some of the, bad words, pero algunos no, ¿verdad? Algunos pues los dejé porque pues así fue que lo dijeron. Y eso es parte de su vida, ¿verdad? Es parte de nuestra vida. No edité el Spanglish ni el code switching. Si hablaba en español y terminaba en inglés, así aparece en la entrevista. Eso sí que quise dejar. Y otra cosa que de hecho me trajo, Roque Raquel fue quien me trajo esto a colación, y es que al principio yo empecé a italicize algunas palabras, ¿verdad? Como que cuando cambiaban el idioma, I would italicize the Spanish words. Y él me trajo un poco ese diálogo sobre the othering of language, right? The othering of language. And I was very, very happy that he told me that, because I hadn't really considered it. Casi siempre uno ve en un texto que es bilingüe alguna forma de, ¿cómo se dice? Italics,
letras itálicas.
Itálica. Y como que entra otro código ahí. Y entonces Roque Raquel decía, pero ¿por qué esa distinción? Porque es que así yo hablo. Así hablamos la mayoría de los escritores y las escritoras que estamos aquí. Así que no debe haber un othering of the language. And I thought that was a very helpful suggestion. Así que no hay ningún cambio en la forma en que se lee el escrito entre idiomas. De momento es en inglés y de momento es en español, y así fluye, porque así fluye en su vida. Y por muchos años también eso era algo que yo me corregía mucho yo misma, ¿no? Especialmente en mis tratos con los colegas de estudios hispánicos, ¿no? Que pues me esforzaba mucho por mantenerme en el mismo idioma. Y luego, después de 25 años de cátedra y de investigación de escritura, no me superviso tanto, right? So if it comes out in English, it comes out in English, especially because I am an English professor, right? If it comes out in Spanish, it comes out in Spanish. Y eso fue una valiosa lección con estos escritores y escritoras. No se censuran, no se cohíben, no ven que siempre tienen que mantenerse en un solo idioma. Porque es que nuestras vidas transcurren en dos idiomas, transcurren en dos culturas, transcurren en dos espacios. Vamos y venimos de Puerto Rico a Estados Unidos, a otras partes del mundo incluso. Así que esa autocensura la cancelé. Y soy mucho más feliz ahora.
Quería saber, el mundo de la lectura es tan grande e inmenso como para tú poder crear una marca. ¿Cuáles fueron algunas complejidades y dificultades que tuviste en todos estos escritores en hacer un breakthrough en la escena, poder conseguir sus casas de imprenta y así poder mercadearse?
Muy importante tu pregunta. La mayoría diría yo que fueron bien forthcoming con las entrevistas y los comentarios que querían hacer. Fueron muy dadivosos, muy generosos y generosas con su tiempo, con la espera, ¿verdad? A través de los años, porque los que sabemos de publicación, no es solamente entregar el manuscrito, es también esperar el proceso editorial de la casa editora y luego el lanzamiento del libro. Pero antes de que llegara a entregar el manuscrito, tuve que ir por ejemplo, como se imaginarán, en el caso de Lin-Manuel Miranda, pues tuve que ir a través de sus agentes. Eso atrasa un poco el proceso también de publicación. Él no, él espontáneo, él súper cool, you know, he talked and talked and talked, fue uno de los que tuve que decirle menos. La experiencia fue muy buena, pero trabajar con los agentes y la editorial, bueno, las personas alrededor de él por el carácter de quién es, fue... ¿Cuál es la pregunta? ¿Cuál es la palabra que utilizó? Fue desafiante, fue desafiante y un poco atrasa el proyecto. Pero entiendo por dónde vienen, entiendo el proceso de cuidar a los autores, right? Los agents cuidando. Con los otros y las otras, bien poca intervención tuvieron agents. Y como no cité textualmente de ninguna de las obras, pues no tuve que ir con copyright issues, right? Sí, ellos y ellas se refirieron a algunos pasajes, pero como un poco hablando de sus propias palabras, no textual, como aparece en el texto. Así que no tuve que ir por ese proceso. Y fue muy revelador. Fue muy revelador la accesibilidad de estos escritores y escritoras. Algunos completamente todo el tiempo disponibles, otros menos disponibles por los compromisos que tenían. Muchos de ellos y ellas son profesores también, así que tienen sus propias responsabilidades académicas. So it was a challenge. It was a challenge, but I was very happy with the final project. Tengo que admitir también que en el trayecto perdí algunos que tenía originalmente, así que eso se transformó también la edición del libro, porque algunos estoy pensando tal vez en tres en particular, pues se movieron a otras cosas, a otros proyectos, y entonces no eran tan forthcoming con las ediciones a la entrevista, y entonces pues tuve que tomar decisiones editoriales y decir, mira, si no me lo entrega, pues no puedo incluirte. Y again, I totally understand, porque pues es que cada uno tiene vidas complicadas, right? So, Algunos fueron dejados para una futura ocasión, ¿verdad? I'm hoping to have other editions of this work as well, ¿verdad? Que pueda seguir, porque es que hay tantos autores out there, right? I'm thinking of Justin Torres, for example. I'm thinking of the wonderful poet Denise Froman. I don't know how many of you know her. Her poetry is really explosive. So hay muchos y muchas autores y autoras que debemos recoger. Estoy contando con algunos de ustedes, ¿verdad? Que tomen esa batuta y le interese entrevistar a escritores y escritores de la diáspora.